the cloud. There we go. Very good. Okay, shalom, everyone. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us, and today's session is going to be the halachic status of cloned meat. So let me explain to you why I chose this subject, because, there we go, because maybe you saw this picture a number of weeks ago. Actually, I think it was only 2 weeks ago. Prime Minister Netanyahu visited one of the world's leading cultured meat companies, the Aleph Farms, and tasted its cultivated steak. And oh my God, he's not wearing a mask. Yeah, because he's about to eat. That's why he's not wearing a mask. And his response was, I can't taste the difference. So this hit the internet, and it restarted a conversation and research into the halachic status of cloned meat. And believe it or not, this actually started a long time ago. As I mentioned yesterday in Minyan, the first time this really was discussed was over 35 years ago, when in science fiction television shows like Star Trek, when there's something on Star Trek called a food replicator. And what it does is you walk over to the wall where the device exists, and you say into a computer, computer, I want a hamburger, French fries, and a Diet Coke. And it would take energy and to go directly from energy into mass. And that mass would be determined by your request. So the question is, 35 years ago, the question was asked, is that kosher? And there was a lot of discussion that is halachically relevant to this discussion, and I actually incorporated a lot of it into our discussion. You should know that the idea of cultivated steak, cultivated meat, as I mentioned last night, that it's really cloned meat. And the idea is, though, it's all about marketing and branding a product. They're calling it now cultivated steak instead of cloned meat or cloned, because cloning causes a great deal of fear in the public eye. And personally, look how many people are not vaccinating themselves or are telling people not to get vaccinated because they're afraid that it's going to cause, ridiculous things like infertility in men and women. It's going to make your hair fall out. If in fact, someone was just telling me that Moderna's, this is probably, I'm not sure if it's true or not, but it's going around the internet that you can't take Moderna's vaccine because if you have fillers in your face, like women who have fillers, that it will attack the fillers as a foreign body.
Wow.
I'm not saying it's impossible, but if we have two doctors with us, we'll tell you that messenger RNA will encode for a very specific protein on a protein receptor on the viral particle. Yes. And that there's no reason to believe that the collagen or whatever they shoot into your face has the same, polymer antigen as as the COVID-19.
No. Okay.
And if it did, your autoimmune system would attack it now. I'm sorry, doctor.
Okay. The mRNA. Okay. In the mRNA that you have on both the Pfizer as well as the Moderna vaccine is specific to the spike protein of the virus.
Right. And if I'm not mistaken, isn't that's called an antigen, right?
The spike protein would be the antigen. That's correct.
Right. So the whole idea is if the messenger RNA produces an antibody that attacks the virus, then why isn't it attacking your filler today?
Okay, because
your natural antibody. So that the whole thing is that it's misinformation.
And they're also saying that from the flu vaccine that it was creating autistic children.
Well, it fits all into our conversation today, and that is that in the ultra-Orthodox community specifically, and a lot of people don't like that term ultra-Orthodox, but in the ultra-Orthodox community, there is a movement of anti-vaxxing, the anti-vaccination community. And I can tell you that in I think it was Lakewood about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a horrible measles outbreak because they didn't vaccinate, and the yeshivas didn't care. You know, the county school board had rules and regulations about vaccinating, and they got out of it or they ignored it. How do you get out of it? They say it's a religious issue. Like Seventh-day Adventists don't take blood transfusions. They were claiming that it's against their religion to get vaccinated. By the way, you should know that the Lubavitcher Rebbe 40 years ago came out against them and said, you have to vaccinate. You know, the dangers to not vaccinating are significantly greater than vaccinating. That's the bottom line. Okay, so this is what started the whole renewal of research into the kashrut issues of cultivated meat. And I'll use their term because, as I mentioned last night, I think it was Sunkist or Starkist, Sunkist, they're repackaging and rebranding their product because we live in a generation that if you're under 40, you don't want to eat prunes. Prunes is what your grandmother used to eat when she was constipated. So they stopped calling them prunes and they called them dried plums because everyone will buy dried plums. But, you know, there's a whole generation that God forbid you should purchase a prune or eat one. So it's all about marketing. And that's why it really would be a better term to, you know, I think, to say cloned rather than cultivated. But that usage is now going to be out of usage. So let's talk real specifically. Why is there growing motivation to make man-made meat alternatives? And the answer is, and this is all, you know, I did the follow-up research. Meat production is extremely inefficient. By 2050, which is only 30 years away, 70% of all arable land will be needed to devoted to meat production. 70%. Cattle raising is responsible for 44% of greenhouse gases, with cows alone responsible for producing close to 40% of the methane released into the atmosphere. And the fourth reason is issues of cruelty, specifically things like veal production. But also you should know that last week, they passed in Europe, and the EU is going to revisit it as well, a ban against kosher and halal ritual slaughtering. It's very, very anti-Semitic, and I'll prove it to you. Why can a person go hunting with a shotgun or a bow and arrow and kill an animal? Well, you don't even kill the animal. You know, very few hunters kill an animal with one shot. And then you have to chase it and put it out of its misery. That's okay. But a rabbi doing ritual slaughtering in controlled environment is not. By the way, I could understand people arguing that I've worked in, when I was a teenager, you know, we worked in a Schlachthaus in outside of Liberty in the Catskills. So I saw the up close and dirty. I saw ritual slaughtering. It's not beautiful. You know, everyone's, oh, it's not beautiful. There's blood everywhere. There's noise. There's guts. There's fecal matter. You know, manure. It's like all over the place. But about 100 feet away, there was a trafe slaughterhouse. And it was the same exact thing, if not worse, actually. So why was there a trafe slaughterhouse? Because first of all, for zoning reasons, the slaughterhouses were in an area of liberty. Second of all, it was if you opened up a cow after slaughtering and you found that for halachic reasons it wasn't kosher because of issues with organs, you just wheeled it over to the non-Jewish slaughterhouse and they bought it from the Jewish slaughterhouse. So I can tell you that these are really issues of anti-Semitism and not about animal cruelty. It's real, and the proof is, again, And by the way, I think I included it when I updated last night. You can Google in Belgium hunting licenses, and I did. And what happens is there's actually an industry in Belgium where you can go and hunt. There's a whole list of animals that, depending on the season, deer, wild boar, geese, ducks, that you would shoot with a rifle, in a lake. And there's no restrictions whatsoever on them. So all that proves is, you get a license and you can, mutilate a deer. You can shoot them with bows and arrows. Do you know what your chance of humanely killing a deer with a bow and arrow? It's ridiculous. So that's why this is really, really important. The halachic standing of cultivated meat. Okay, so also, if you look closely, the amount of water necessary for cows to produce meat is also exceptionally high. And we're entering into a phase in world ecology that there's definitely a increased water shortage. I'm not sure if you know what's going on in South Africa, the country South Africa. The water shortage there is beyond critical. They're in something like the 15th year of a drought, and they've instituted hundreds, and I'm not exaggerating, hundreds of legal limitations on water use. And in many countries, it's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better. And that's why this is particularly important, because 1,500 liters of water, to produce a pound of meat on a cow, that's crazy. Actually, it's 2.2 pounds. That's really crazy. So just to give you an idea. So here's the comparison. 1 kilogram of beef needs 1,200 square meters of land. 1 kilogram of beef needs 1,500 liters of water, and 7 liters, which is approximately 2 gallons of gasoline, which is equivalent to 160 kilograms of potatoes. 1,500 liters. Basically, one meal for your family, 2 pounds of beef, is an equivalent of a whole year's worth of water for a person. It's crazy. Okay, and again, cows emit 80 times the greenhouse gases for the equivalent of 1 kilogram of wheat. Now, a little footnote about this. I remember the first time I heard about this, that cows, there was actually a study that was sponsored by the Department of the Interior and the Food and Drug Administration. And it found there was something I remember reading, oh my God, this is so stupid. Because it was a study that cost like $25 million to find out how much flatulence cows have when they metabolize, food. I remember thinking like, oh my God, that's so stupid. And it turns out they found it's true. 40% of methane gas that is released into the atmosphere is a byproduct of a cow's metabolism. Okay, so let's continue. Current meat alternatives. I'm sure many of you are familiar with these. We have most of these in my own freezer right now. Vegetable-based products, i.e. soy, and the new Impossible Burger. The Impossible Burger is extremely popular. I believe it's Burger King now has this Impossible Burger, which is it's made out of soy. It's made out of plant protein. I'm not sure what it's made out of, but they swear that it's flavored with a protein that really makes it taste like meat. It is reasonably priced. I think it's about $3.89 a pound. And it goes up to $5.89 if you buy it at Trader Joe's. There are currently 240 kosher soy meat products available in supermarkets. Rabbi, you're exaggerating. So just think about Morningstar. So Morningstar are these 3 brands. I gave you an example. when the kids were small, Morningstar only had two products, grillers and this fake bacon strip. Then they added fake morning sausage. And now, besides the grillers, which are fake hamburgers, they have like 8 different types of grillers because there's such a market for these soy products. It used to be one type of hamburger. Now there's 8 different type of hamburgers. So when there's 240 kosher soy meat products, I disagree. Look at this torfuki, which is tofu turkey. And you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 12, 16, 18, 22. Right here, just made by this one company. There's over 30, right here, listed 30 different flavors of soybean products. Light Life is the same. They make the Smart Deli. And Gardein also makes, they actually make, it's OU. They actually have whole little, what do you call those miniature hamburgers? Sliders that you buy them. I'm not sure if you can see it here. And they're ready, you just microwave them and they're ready to eat. And apparently children love it. I haven't had it. So Like Meat makes plant-based meat from wheat, peas, lupins, and soy. The neutral tasting strip can be textured like chicken or colored and flavored to taste like other meats. In 2020, the cost is no more than packaged meat. Like I said, anywhere from $3.89 to $5.89 a pound. So that's not kosher meat, because I've never seen kosher meat, chopped meat, for less than $7.99 a pound, $8 a pound. But this product and others like it pose no problems for kashrut observant consumers. It's all, do you ever hear of Loma Linda Foods? Loma Linda, California is the international headquarters of the Seventh-day Adventists. And Seventh-day Adventists they're not supposed to have coffee. They're not supposed to eat chocolate because there's caffeine in it. And they're not supposed to smoke, and they're not supposed to eat meat. But if they do eat meat, they're supposed to eat kosher. How do I know? Because when I was the rabbi in Asheville, North Carolina, the second largest Seventh-day Adventist boarding school was in a place called Arden, North Carolina, which was only 20 minutes away. And what was really interesting about it is they used to contact me frequently. And I spoke at their high school, which had 1,200 students in their high school, of which over 800 of them lived in a dormitory. And what was their problems? Just like problems that we had at USY. The kids were sneaking out at night, hitchhiking into downtown, and going to McDonald's and getting cheeseburgers because the school was all parov. Now, Loma Linda Foods is the name of their food manufacturing concern in Loma Linda, California. And Judy and I used to buy Loma Linda Foods because not only are they plant-based proteins, but they were OU kosher. So the big thing is we used to go to Arden because they had a food store that was run by the Seventh-day Adventists, and the kids, we could get kosher marshmallows because they also don't eat gelatin. So the whole idea is that there are plenty of current meat alternatives. Now, the problem with meat substitutes that are plant-based is that they don't have complementary proteins and amino acids. They're healthy. You do get proteins, but they're not macrobiotic. What does macrobiotic mean? Macrobiotic usually means that it's the certain plants have certain amino acids, other plants have alternative amino acids, and it's the fusing of your cuisine so that you're mixing different plant proteins and plant sources so that your diet has the complete nutritional need for your body. Meat, by definition, usually, I'm pretty sure, and again, I'm looking at our cohort today, and I see that many of you would have more information than I do in this particular realm. But from what I understand, animal proteins do have a complete fundamental source of essential amino acids. By definition, they're flesh, they're muscle. And the proteins that you need to build muscle is you're eating muscle. That's basically what animal protein is. Any questions before we continue? Okay. By the way, anyone who thinks that this stuff tastes like meat, don't get me wrong, I like it and I eat it, but it doesn't taste like meat. And the fake bacon, I don't know what bacon tastes like, so I'm not sure. It's basically salty, smoky, textured. Do Bacos taste like bacon? I don't know. I've never had bacon in my life, but Morningstar bacon strips, it tastes like smoky, textured, nothing, you know? So I don't know what to tell you. It's tasty. I like it. I enjoy it. I just don't know if I can tell you the meat, the fake meat, it's good, but I don't think it tastes like meat. It's like saying, does carob really taste like chocolate? No, it tastes like carob. Is it chocolatey? Could be chocolatey, but it's not chocolate any more than strawberries are raspberries. They have a different taste. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. Okay, so let's get to the halachic status of cloned meat. So let's make sure that everyone understands that this is what, when we talked about cloning animals 20 years ago, this was the famous Dolly, the cloned sheep. So what happens is, we're starting at 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock. We're going to go a whole circle around this clock. So they took a sheep. They took a donor nucleus they took a cell from the sheep. They removed the nucleus. They planted it into an enucleated cell, and then then they implanted it. Then they allowed it to start forming into a blastocyst, and it started growing and nurturing. And then they quickly inserted it into into the uterus of a female sheep, and it grew. And it wasn't this sheep's biological offspring; it was this sheep's biological offspring. And the whole idea was, down here, the cloned lamb, her name was Dolly. Dolly was an exact twin to this sheep on the top. You understand? Any questions before we go on? It was not an offspring. It wasn't a child. It was an exact twin. Now, in theory, what that would be is, you would move a cell from my cheek. You would place the nucleus of that cell into a enucleated zygote, and then you would place that into a woman, a surrogate woman, and she would bring that child to term and give birth. And it would not be my son; it would be my twin. It would look exactly like me, except with no scars. Like I slashed my head was smashed open, but if you looked at that child 60 years from now, it would probably look remarkably like me. Same beard, same nose, same systemic arthritis, because it's me, just 60 years apart. So that's what cloning used to mean, that you cloned the entire animal. Now, I can tell you as well that when this started 20 years ago, there were a lot of halachic decisions and a lot of real science fiction-like discussions. So, for example, I think I'm going to stop the share just so I don't want to distract anyone. But so let me explain this to you. What was our fear 20 years ago? And I actually was on a committee because of my science background. So here was the fear of 20 years ago. The fear was rich people would clone themselves. And while the surrogate mother was gestating the baby, while the baby was growing in some surrogate mother, you pay her $100,000 and she would grow a baby, and she would grow me inside her. I would clone myself. And what happens is there are a number of drugs we know that cause the brain not to develop in fetuses. So what would they do? They would give the surrogate, different drugs that would cause the brain not to develop, or to induce what's called hydrocephaly or whatever. They would give the mother different drugs that would cause the brain not to develop. Then what would happen? At the end of 9 months, I'm serious, it sounds like science fiction, but it was a real concern 20 years ago. The child would be born, and they would keep that child on a respirator, on a heart-lung machine, and keep the child alive. Why? because meanwhile, me, the billionaire, I would eat, I would drink to excess, I would smoke, I would abuse my body. And after like 10 years, I would get a lung transplant. I wouldn't have to, it wouldn't be a similar graft, a similar donor. It would be my lungs. It would be exactly my lungs. It would be exactly my kidneys. I would never have to go on anti-rejection drugs. It would be, a minor, I shouldn't say minor, but I'd be able to, billionaires, we were afraid, would grow their own replacement organs by this process of cloning. That was our real field, halachically. And what happened was, within 10 years, we saw that that was ridiculous. And let's get back to the discussion at hand. So what happens is, this is the old school of classical cloning of the entire animal. Now we know that that's not necessary. So the previous outdated concept of cloning animals, and again, this is explaining the process. The cloning process produces a genetically identical offspring through non-sexual means. So you see the different color cows. So you would take the nucleus removed from a donor egg. The nucleus of the cell from the original animal is added to the donor egg. The two are fused with electricity. That was the process back then. The egg starts to divide and forms into an embryo, which is implanted into a surrogate. This is the surrogate. And then the clone animal is born 9 months later. It is genetically identical to its original and is capable of reproducing sexually. So here you would see this brown animal over here. It's actually a clone of this animal. It's the exact duplicate, separated by the age of the donor and the clone. That was the original fear. Any questions before we go on? Because that was the concept of cloning. Okay, good. So now let me explain to you how the process is done, to what's going on today, because this is also the benefits of cloning, biomedical benefits of cloning. Current techniques concentrate on cloning only the cells and tissues needed for consumption or medicinal use. So let me explain that. So here you have a fertilized zygote, okay? And it starts replicating first into 2, and then to 4, and then to 18, then to 16, and to 32. And it reaches a point where it forms a cellular membrane, and it's called the blastocyst, okay? Any questions so far? These are known as embryonic cells in here, okay? By the way, I definitely am sleep deprived because I keep on saying okay, and I know that's
Okay,
one of my
Rabbi,
yeah.
Rabbi, if I may say, it's embryonic stem cells.
Correct. Over here, harvested stem cells. You're right. So what happens is they opened up this cell membrane, and what pours out are these. You've now harvested the stem cells. Now, what happens in the embryo, it's all about location. Just like real estate, location, location, location. We're not exactly sure how, but it's one of the great mysteries. What happens is, in this stage here, can you see my mouse moving?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what happens is the embryonic stem cells start multiplying and multiplying and multiplying, and then they reach a particular level. And all of a sudden, it's sort of like the stem cells somehow know that on this end, it becomes a head, and on this end, it becomes the feet. And we're not exactly sure how it does it, but it does it. It's sort of like when you put a seed in the ground, and somehow, because of gravity, it shoots the stem goes up and the roots go down. Is it gravity? Does it sense gravity? We don't know. Actually, we have a pretty good idea now. Has to do, well, regardless, let's not go there. So the whole idea is that location affects the stem cells. And what happens is, based on their location, they grow appropriately into cells, like they become brain cells, neurons, neural cells. They become muscle cells, they become kidney cells, liver cells. But they all start exactly the same, called stem cells. It's like Parev. Milk, they're not meat. They haven't differentiated. And it's all based on where they are. They start growing into what eventually becomes A cell becomes tissues, and tissues become organs, and organs become systems, like your nervous system, your skeletal system. So what happens is you break open these cell membranes, you harvest the stem cells. And when you put them in together, this group here will become nerve cells, this becomes muscle cells, this can become bone cells, and those cells then become tissues, and the tissues become organs. Okay, any questions? So by the way, this is
Well,
probably,
Rabbi,
go ahead, Michael.
you have just wiped out half of my presentation on Jewish medical ethics.
Oh, sorry, but I'll still attend.
Well, because right, we actually at Harvard Medical School, together with the Texas Heart Institute, we were the first group to find out that there were such things as cardiac stem cells for heart patients.
Right. Right. So by the way, I would highly encourage anyone who feels I'm making a mistake I would not be, it would not be disrespectful, and I would not be insulted. It's more important that people get accurate information than my ego. So if I make a mistake, I've had this problem with Dr. Gloria Weinberg in the past. She doesn't correct me when I make stupid mistakes, which is actually worse. I'd rather be corrected. Okay, so regardless, so this most probably, basically this process, which is, unless I update this like every 6 months, I doubt if it's up to speed. But basically, this is how they intend to cure various diseases. So, for example, the beta cells of a pancreas. Can you imagine being able to grow embryonic stem cells into the beta cells of pancreatic cells that would produce insulin? And then you would inject them into diabetics' pancreases, and they would start growing inside and make a dysfunctional pancreas into a functional insulin-producing pancreas, basically curing that person's diabetes, if that was the form of diabetes that they were suffering from. Or what happens if a person has a massive coronary, which literally means death of certain heart tissue? Can you imagine taking cardiac stem cells and then injecting it into the area immediately adjacent to the dead cells? Mm-hmm. And then these cardiac stem cells start growing cardiac muscle tissue that then starts beating. So what happens is you basically cure the person of his massive, coronary, a coronary by definition, I'm not correct. Please correct me if I'm wrong. A myocardial infarction means that because of ischemia, lack of oxygen to the muscle cell, it dies. The cardiac muscle cell dies, and it's dead tissue, and that means it may not be conducting electricity properly, and because it's dead. That means it's not pumping efficiently, etc. Imagine injecting cardiac stem cells and fixing the problem, because as the cardiac stem cells start multiplying, they become cells, become tissues, tissues become organs. So that's how all of this relates to the therapeutic process and medicine, and why there's been tremendous breakthroughs in the last 10 years. And again, I'd like to defer to Gloria and Michael, who really are authorities in this area, if you want to add anything or correct me, or how about validate me?
How about what?
How about validating me?
Oh.
Because actually I'm a little scared, because I'm like an undergraduate, lecturing to the professors. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. And then again, this is a very good slide, basically, that shows this was actually a very old slide, because it's basically showing that they're taking various stem cells from bone marrow, and that's not even necessary anymore. Now we've been able to isolate stem cells from blood, from plasma. I mean, you don't even have, this is like really old school, but I always like this graphic, because basically, you can see that you take a stem cell and it can become eventually a liver, a neuron, a skeletal muscle, epithelial cells, neurons, fat cells, cardiac muscles, and blood cells. And this specifically is relative to the kosher issue, because you can make muscle, see skeletal muscle, which is meat, but you can also make fat cells. You can grow fat cells. And what happens is that's what most of the problem is with the cultivated meat. There's zero fat, well, almost zero fat. And it's marbling or fat content that makes it taste fatty and good, right? Right.
Okay, so Rabbi, question on the cultivated meat. How do you know what percentage of fat cells do you need to put into the cultivated meat so that it tastes like meat?
Right. So I would definitely defer to Gloria because, in case you aren't aware, she is definitely a gourmet cook. So I will defer to her. But my personal opinion is that you can actually, when you go shopping in many kosher stores now, they actually tell you what the fat content is, and it ranges anywhere from 4 to 10%. Is that correct, Gloria?
It depends on what you're buying. For instance, Empire turkey, you can get white meat Empire turkey, which is about 5% fat, or you can get the regular turkey, which is actually about 15% fat.
Okay.
So if you want it to taste good, you actually mix the two.
Right, exactly.
Because the lean one is too dry.
Right. Now, the interesting thing is you'd think that it would probably be cheaper to cultivate the fat cell, and the answer is actually it's not. It's just basically the same. It all is based on the cost of the nutrient bath that the cells are going to be growing in, and it's basically the same. So, you know how you used to be able to go to a kosher butcher and they would give you bones for free? They just used to throw them away. Now it's like $3.89 a pound for what? For bones? Like, I don't get it. Like, how the chutzpah to sell us bones? There's no meat on it. So actually, I spoke to a butcher a number of years ago and said, why do you sell bones? He goes, well, when we buy the meat, we buy it, you know, the side of a cow, we're paying for the bones. You don't have to pay for the bones. So they make us pay for the bones now. But to grow bone and to grow fat and to grow muscle cells is going to be basically the same price. But what the difference is, the density of the structure or the lattice work of, for example, it's going to take a lot longer to grow bone tissue than it is to grow fat tissue. And fat tissue will grow faster than apparently than muscle tissue, from what I learned in the research. And that will affect the price, because the longer it takes to make something, the more they have to charge you. Okay, next, growing actual meat in the laboratory. So this is how we actually are doing it. Muscle stem cells are extracted from a donor animal. They're cultivated and grown in an enriched soup medium. So this is not, you know, this is the closest I could get to what basically is happening on an extremely large scale. You know, this isn't the way they do it, but this is a Petri dish with a growth medium. And these are different, actually, if I'm not mistaken, these are viral colonies on a bacteria medium, but it's a good way of figuring out what it, you know, conceptualize what it looks like. So the cells are cultured and grown in an enriched soup medium. Where they reach a predetermined size, the meat is removed and packaged for sale. That's all. So let's take a picture, take a look at this here on the right-hand side. They cleave whatever stage embryo. It starts into a blastocyst, as we discussed. They isolate the inner cell mass. It starts growing it in a dish, in a soup medium. And the cells continue to grow until you get actually tissue colonies that continue to grow. And, you know, here, as you see, these are like groups of 5, but when you get up to groups of like 1 million, now you're talking, now you're cooking with gas. Now you got a pound of meat. And it all depends. By the way, there's an interesting thing that apparently they found that low electrical currents actually increase and stimulate the cell growth. And they're not exactly sure, well, at least the literature I wrote, not exactly sure why, but it seems to be working. Okay, so let's talk about the outcomes and the benefits, and because that also actually is a halachic issue. Because in Judaism, there's something, in halacha, there's something called hefsed meruba, which means are you being wasteful to the point that you're wasting money? So for example, there are a lot of rabbis that forbid the purchasing of a $200 etrog. There are a lot of rabbis that tell their community, you're to go out and buy a $30 etrog. Okay, and that's it. You're not allowed to spend more than $30 because that $30 etrog is just as beautiful and is just as kosher as the $200 one. And you've got a family of 9 children and you shouldn't be wasting $170 on an etrog that you're only going to be using 6 days. Why? The eighth day is Shmini Atzeret, and 1 day of Sukkot is Shabbos, and you don't take it. So that's ridiculous. Answer is no. You shouldn't be wasting. So benefits of like financial issues do weigh into a halacha. Are you allowed to, spend $30,000 on? Well, there's a very famous discussion that came up to my rabbinic association. It was about a little bit more than 10 years ago. In New York, there was a new matzeva headstone available for purchase. It was a $30,000 headstone, anywhere from 25 to 30,000. So let's say it was $30,000 headstone. What was it? It was a regular headstone that had embedded inside it a computer screen. And what happens is you could program it on a person's birthday, anniversary, Father's Day, Mother's Day. You could send it messages and it would play. You didn't even have to be there. But on your father's birthday, it would play happy birthday. It was $30,000. So the question was, Rabbi, are you allowed to use these? So it was universal. Not one of us said you could. And one of the primary reasons is there are people starving 5 blocks away and you're wasting $30,000 on a matzeva. And the second reason is because it only came with a 2-year warranty. And everyone usually laughs when I say that. But the reality of it is, think about it, because basically it was a computer out in the rain, in the snow, in the sleet, and in tremendous varying temperatures. It had a 2-year warranty. How long do you think a computer is going to last outside before it's broken? And the idea is no, for a temporary, and by the way, you know what you're supposed to do on your father's birthday? Go visit him in the cemetery, not send him a text message through a computer in his matzeva. Okay, that's how crazy it is. So this all does actually have to do with Jewish law. So what are the outcomes and benefits? Because this is something that actually plays into Jewish law, the actual logistics, the fundamental issue about money. Reduce the number of livestock worldwide from 10 billion animals to 10,000 animals. Because there's going to be no reason whatsoever to maintain animals. And if you remember that previous slide, you saw how much 1,500 liters of water to make 2 pounds of meat. That's ridiculous. Animals will not be subjected to any slaughter technique, kosher or otherwise. Some science futurists foresee in the not distant future that consumers will have toaster-sized appliances in their homes where they will make their own meat. Now, if you think that that's ridiculous, let me share with you. Okay, do you know what this is? Whoops, that's too obvious. That's my wife. Do you know what this is? Okay. This cell phone is more powerful than all of the computers on Apollo 11's mission to the moon. And that way, those computers weighed something like 2,200 pounds and were the size of 4 refrigerators. Boom shakalaka. And they cost something like $600 million. So let's say this one costs $600 and it's more powerful than that. Look where we are in 30 years, 40 years. It's amazing. So you think that this is impossible? It absolutely is not. By the way, one of the benefits of COVID-19, everyone, we acknowledge the horrible costs and 350,000 people I think are now dead in America alone. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Last time I checked, it was 338,000. So we're rapidly approaching 350,000 people dead. So that's a tragedy. And let's make sure that everyone accepts that it's a tragedy. Okay. One of the amazing things is the billions and billions and billions of dollars of research that went into manufacturing and research and development of vaccines in such a short time. We have two doctors here. Let me ask you a question. How long would it normally have taken to make a viable vaccine? 8 years?
Anywhere from 4 to 7 years.
Right. And we did it in 10 months or less. It's crazy. So that the idea is that when you think of how far we've come, do not think that it is, by the way, you and I are not going to make any money off of the vaccine. But if we had a toaster-sized appliance where, tomorrow night you want to have turkey, you don't have to go to the store. I don't have to call, what's it called, Uber Eats or what's it called, bread basket, and have it delivered even. I could just put the ingredients, and 24 hours from now, I could have 2.2 pounds of turkey waiting for me, fresh. I'm gonna save money. There's additional motivation for me to have one of these. It's not science fiction. So let's talk about halachic issues. We're getting to the meat of the issue. By the way, this is a very accurate portrayal of what it looks like in the Shlach house. This is a wood carving from close to 600 years ago, and it's not much different. Okay, let's get down to the halachic issues. Let's take a break for a second because I see someone started a chat. Hi, Rabbi, just curious if there is a connection for etrogs needing to be blemish-free and have its stem intact, and animals before slaughter also have to be free of blemishes. That's an excellent question, Steve. And the answer is, regarding an etrog being blemish-free, you're allowed to have blemishes. You're just not allowed to have certain types of blemishes or damage to it, because it has to be a complete fruit. So if you remove the stem or the pitum, you are eating, it's like taking a bite out of an apple. If someone ordered an apple in a store, would you take a bite out of it first? Or if you ordered an apple, a baked apple, and it arrived to the table, in a restaurant, and it looked like there's a piece missing, would you eat it or would you send it back? I think someone took a bite of my apple, right? So the idea is that when you make a bracha on the lulav and etrog, it has to be a complete fruit. That's what the idea of now regarding an animal being blemish-free, it's allowed to have a blemish, but it cannot have certain diseases. So for example, here's a little shocker for you. In the United States of America, meat is controlled by the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA. And the USDA has like 5 different gradients of meat. There's prime, there's choice, there's, I forget what they are. I used to know them by heart. And the idea though is that in America, the requirements for meat to be edible is remarkably dissimilar to Judaism. So for example, the United States Department of Agriculture, there are rules and regulations for slaughterhouses. You stun the animal, you slaughter it, and then you open it up. And what happens is, well, what about prior inspection? And basically, if the animal can walk, it's healthy enough to be eaten, which is ridiculous. Because you remember mad cow disease?
Mm-hmm.
So mad cow disease was caused by a virus in the neural tissue of the brain and neural column of cows. And the interesting thing is, according to Jewish law, the rabbi grabs the animal, right, and looks at it. Now, one of the things that disqualifies an animal is if its eyes are moving, or any neurological, or it has a gait disorder. A gait disorder means it's walking funny. Now, what happens is on a farm, when a farmer sees a gait disorder, he knows his cow's going to die soon. So you know what he does? He quickly sells it for meat, and he'll get $5 a pound for it. $5, it's called on the hoof. But if he doesn't sell it right away, 2 weeks later the animal dies. He's stuck with a dead animal. It's worthless. Maybe he can sell it for dog food. So the idea is that the United States Department of Agriculture has a lot of leniencies about what is acceptable, and Judaism is just the opposite. after our ritual slaughtering, you have to open up the animal and examine the organs. Now, a quick lesson on glot, and then maybe I'll open up for more questions. So one of the things you have to do is, and if you look closely, whoops, what happened here? Sorry. So what you see here is that this shochet is eviscerating the animal. He does what's called the midline incision, and that goes from actually this is not accurate. It goes from the much lower on the sternum, actually goes from the trachea to the pubis, what we would call the pubis. And then he eviscerates the animal. The organs are taken out and the organs are examined, specifically the lungs. And they literally blow up the lungs to check to see if there's any lesions or diseases in the lungs. Now, one of the things you have to do when you examine them is you run your hands over the pleura, which is like a membrane on the lungs, and you can see. Now, maybe you ever have a really, really bad bronchitis or whatever, and you cough up blood, that you cough so hard that you ruptured small blood vessels, and that's what you cough up blood. Now, it happens to sometimes cows, the same exact thing. You know, everything that we catch, animals catch. That's why there's smallpox, but there's also cowpox. Cows used to get pox also. They didn't get smallpox, they got cowpox. You know, there's a whole discussion about ferrets getting COVID-19. I'm not sure if you read that. So the whole idea, though, is that when a cow would like cough really hard, get bronchitis, whatever, they might rupture some blood vessels, and that would cause scar tissue. Now, just because the lung has scar tissue on it doesn't mean the animal's not kosher. It depends. Is it encapsulated? Does it permeate between the layers of the membranes of tissue? And then there's very specific laws about, you know, and one of the things you do is you literally blow up the lungs like a balloon, and then you examine it. Glot literally means smooth, like a baby's behind. That's what glot means. That when the rabbis examined the lungs, there was no issues. It was a perfect lung. The lungs were perfect, the organs were perfect. You didn't have to take the lungs over to a rabbi, who then take out his ocular, you know what an ocular is? You know, like a jeweler's loop, and examine it and go, okay, it's kosher. No, glot means there were no questions, no issues, so it's 100% beyond the question of doubt. People are willing to pay extra for it. But you should know that glot is really an invention of the Orthodoxy in the last 60, 70 years. In Europe, there was no such thing as glot. It was either kosher or it wasn't kosher. Okay, so I hope I answered those questions. Can we clone a red heifer? That is, if we find the first one. These are very good questions. Steve, was it Steve? No, it was Liliana. Liliana, excellent question. That's one I would venture to say no one even thought about asking yet. But if we had the first one, we wouldn't need to clone it. Right? Why would we need to clone it? I guess for future usage. Okay.
For future use, yeah.
And the answer is to your last question, during the time of temple sacrificing, were they all inspected? Yes, they were all inspected the same process as we have today. Okay, so let's get back to the halachic issues. The Jewish injunction against Aver min hachai, a limb from a living animal. This law precludes eating meat from a living animal. So let me explain this to you. In many regions of the world where there's no refrigeration, even today, what they would do is they would not kill an animal right off. You know why? You kill a cow that weighs 1,200 pounds, and you're a small group of people, you're a small tribe, a small clan, okay? How much meat can you eat? And how much meat can you dry and without a refrigerator? How long, preserving it? So they literally, in many cultures, they would remove slowly limbs of the animal. The most frequently removed part of an animal that was eaten was the tail. And tail makes apparently oxtail soup is really supposedly like a real, what's the word, delicacy, the bones of the tail. So the idea is that you can cut off the cow's tail and the cow wouldn't die. You can, so I got to tell you a story that relates so you can understand Aver Min HaChai. And I'm going to end on this because next week we'll continue with Aver Min HaChai. So the city slicker is driving down a country road, and all of a sudden he sees a three-legged pig running alongside his car. And he speeds up to 25 miles an hour, and the pig's running alongside the car. Three-legged pig. He speeds up to 30 miles an hour, 35, 40, and the pig is running alongside. What's worse, the pig is looking at him and smiling. Three-legged pig, and all of a sudden the road curves to the right and the pig goes to the left. The guy slams on the brakes and he decides, I got to figure out what's the story with this pig. So he follows the pig into the farm and he walks over to the farmer and he goes, excuse me, sir, I just happened to see a three-legged pig. He goes, oh yeah, that's Sadie, our pig. Because you mind, I can't believe that, a three-legged pig. What's the story behind that three-legged pig? That's not no ordinary pig. Last summer, while we were sleeping, our house caught on fire. Sadie was in the barn. She smelled our house on fire. She broke down the barn doors. She jumped through the window, breaking the glass, dragged all four of our children out of the burning house, came back into the house a fifth time, woke me and my wife up. We were semi-unconscious, and dragged us out of the house. And that's the story of Sadie the pig. And the guy goes, and her missing a leg, did she lose her leg in the fire? And the farmer goes, no, 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 no. But a special pig like Sadie, you don't eat her all at once.
Oh my God, that's just...
This is what you get when I'm sleep deprived. This is what you get when I'm sleep deprived. But that really explains Aver Min HaChai. According to Jewish law, you're not allowed to eat meat from a living animal. You're not allowed to remove meat from an animal and then eat it.
They do it in Japan and in China in particular.
Yes, yes.
Awful.
I got news for you. It's still done in Africa as well. In fact, there are, you know, for example, everyone, you may or may not know this, but the Watusi are very prestigious cow herders. And what they do is they actually bloodlet, and they mix the milk and the blood together to make a protein drink. And according to Jewish law, drinking blood is not only forbidden, but it's also Aver Min HaChai. You're eating food from a living animal. You're not allowed to do that. So just to give you insight to the primary problem is that is cloned meat. Think about it. You're taking a cell from the cheek of the animal or whatever, and you're growing meat. So is it Aver Min HaChai? Are you eating meat from a living animal? The donor is still alive. You know, Sadie the pig, she's the donor, she's still alive. Are you allowed to cut off her, you know, forearm and eat it? No, it's Aver Min HaChai. Can you surgically, you know, can a really, you know, trained classical veterinarian surgeon remove part of an animal and then eat it according to Jewish law? And the answer is no, it's Aver Min HaChai. A limb, Aver Min HaChai, from a live animal. So the next question, we're going to actually end at the end of this. What is the status of meat grown from a non-kosher animal? From non-kosher animal cells. What happens, for example, not if it's from a cow, what happens if I take it from a pig or from a rabbit? You know, rabbit, I want to taste rabbit, or from a frog, I want frog's legs, right? If you take the donor cell, is from a non-kosher animal. If the meat comes from a petri dish and not an actual pig, is it still bacon? That's the question. What if the lab meat was grown in a nutrient bath that also included animal byproducts? And this is actually is an ongoing problem because it turns out that there's a very popular nutrient bath for growing of cells that includes bovine, and not only bovine, but other animal protein byproducts. So that's where we are. And that was the basically the introduction to, we definitely have one more week's worth of study material. All right, do we have any questions?
Yeah, with respect to that you just discussed, I mean, this is really, really interesting all. There are animals that are kosher despite the fact that they may eat an animal that is not kosher.
Absolutely. I'll give you an example. Can you
A
take a
worm.
shrimp, put it on a hook, go out into the ocean and catch a salmon?
I
The
don't
answer
know.
is yes. The only thing is that if you open up the salmon, you should throw away the stomach, because what's in the stomach of the salmon? A shrimp. But no one ever says, well, no taint Tom, does it give taste to the salmon? The answer is no. You're allowed to. It's an excellent question, Liliana. Gloria?
What happens if you culture this, you slaughter the animal and then culture its cells? You ritually slaughter the cow and then culture cells.
Right. Which is basically, by the way, that's going to be the next
Okay.
the next series of questions. So for example, what happens if you take a particular strain of Kobe beef that's like $200 a pound? So a lot of people think that it's because they massage the Kobe cow, and no, it's not. It has to do with generations of a very specific cow that's fed a very specific diet. It's not because they're massaging it that the beef tastes differently. So the idea is, yes, that's going to be the next level, that you'll be able to. There's actually talk about animals that have become extinct, that you'll be able to identify proteins from 200-year-old stuffed animals. I mean, not proteins, you'll be able to isolate their DNA and take it to the next level from extinct animals. And be able to eat
if you culture, it's really from an animal that you've ritually slaughtered. It really is no different than eating a piece of meat that's been ritually slaughtered in kosher.
So what happens is, right. So if the animal's ritually slaughtered, then you have an excellent point. Then it would not be Aver Mina Chai. You're not eating from a live animal. That would do away with the problem. But here's the whole thing. Why bother even killing the animal? That means you're going to have to waste 1,500 liters of water for every 2 pounds. You'd have to waste 1,500 square meters of ground per pound. Why grow that animal at all? And plus, when you can just go ahead.
Well, theoretically, it's possible to create just eternal lines from that growth.
Right. You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. And apparently that's what Olive Farms is doing now. What Dr. Weinberg is talking about is that right now there are stem cell lines that are, that some of them date back to the 1950s. And what happens is, to do federal research on stem cells, you have to have one of those legal stem lines to prove that it didn't come from illegally aborted tissue. Because a lot of the stem cell research was done on stem cells from abortions. So the federal government said, well, if you want our money under Republican guidelines that was passed, if you want federal money, then you have to make sure that the stem cells that you're working on, you're doing research on, were not from illegal or inappropriate sources like abortion. So Dr. Weinberg is absolutely correct. There's millions of stem cell research, not millions, let's say thousands of universities doing stem cell research on 8 stem cell lines. So we could do the same thing. You have one cow, and they're going to be, donating 1 million cells, and they can be one. It could be all. We could all be eating the same cow all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
So it's absolutely feasible. Now the question is that I understand though that there is something called telomere breakdown. So what happens is, apparently after like a certain number of reproductive lines, the cells don't last as long. Does Dr. Michael, does that sound right?
That is
Yeah.
correct. The,
Yeah.
Right.
The maximum is about 50 passings.
Right. And then it's called telomere elongation, I think, or,
That is correct. The problem is with the telomere. Yep.
right. So I'm not, it's like, unfortunately, I'm out of this like close to 40 years, but I always try to keep up on the
Okay,
research and development.
And Rabbi, since you're so knowledgeable, there is one exception to that. Those are the HeLa cells that are immortal.
Right.
Okay, so you kind of broke up. I couldn't hear you. What are they called?
Oh, okay, they're called HeLa cells, HeLa, or
Right.
Henrietta Lacks. And those are immortal cells. We have been using those cells now for 65 years.
Right.
It's a good book.
Oh, they made a book out of that.
What does it taste like? What do you mean it's a good book? All right, Chevra, I'm going to pause the recording and wish everyone a happy secular New Year. So before I pause, my long-term joke, people would say to me, Rabbi, is Passover early or late this year? And my response would always be, what are you talking about? Same time as every year, the 15th of Nisan. People say to me, Rabbi, I just wanted to wish you a happy New Year. And I go, that's so thoughtful of you. 7 months in advance. That's so thoughtful of you. So happy new secular year. And we should only have bracha and good news in the coming days.
Thank you, Rabbi, to you and all
All right.
of you too. Thank you, and everybody here. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.